Somewhat surprisingly for an entrepreneurial-driven economy such as Hong Kong's, there are only relatively few business investment visas granted each year. The 200 to 300 approvals recorded are extremely modest compared to the 25,000 employment visas annually, and indeed the 1,300 capital investment visas which were granted in 2010. As the Hong Kong Immigration Department don't provide statistics on the number of applications received, it does appear safe to assume that the low number of business investment visa approvals is less an indication of the interest of foreign nationals who wish to establish or joining their business in Hong Kong, but actually more a reflection of the reality that getting a business investment visa approved is one of the most challenging of all Hong Kong visa processes. That notwithstanding, foreign nationals arrive in droves to participate in the amazing business possibilities which Hong Kong has to offer. And naturally enough, the Director of Immigration does not discourage applications from people to start up new or join in existing businesses in the HKID.
The business investment visa approvability tests places a burden on the applicant to show that he's in a position to make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong. But in many ways, that's like asking, how long is a piece of string? Whilst the visa information document which follows looks at the discrete elements of the investment visa approvability test, there is one particular difficulty with an application for a business investment visa that needs to be looked at right from the very outset. And this is the catch-22 which is inherent in the way that the Immigration Department consider and process business investment visa applications. And the catch-22 really relates directly to the notion that you can't join in a business unless you have secured the consent of the Immigration Department. However, you can't secure the consent of the Immigration Department until you can show that you're capable of making a contribution to Hong Kong. But you can't show a contribution without actually joining in a business, and now once again you can't join in a business until you get the consent of the Hong Kong Immigration Department. And the test requires that you only show prospective, not immediately observable contribution. And how this translates is that on the basis that you have an application in the system, that is, you've put the Immigration Department on notice that you are engaging in this activity and that you're seeking their consent for, they will effectively close their eyes to any prospective breach of conditions of stay. If you don't have an application in the system, you are vulnerable to a prosecution for breach of conditions of stay. So the takeaway message from the catch-22 situation is to get your application in as soon as you possibly can in order to protect yourself. When the Immigration Department look at a particular business plan or a business that is in motion at this time, and they apply the approvability test criteria, they're effectively looking at three particular areas of activity that will go to show them that this business does stand the best possible chance of becoming a very solid entrenched commercial entity over the long haul. The first is they will look to see if the business does possess suitable business premises, and they must be suitable in all the in all the circumstances. As you'd expect, if you are planning to run this business out of your spare bedroom or from your kitchen table, the Immigration Department will not typically envisage that as being substantial enough for the purposes of the prospective benefit that needs to be shown by the applicant when he's making his application. Therefore, suitable business premises need to be arranged and need to be demonstrated or available to the Immigration Department in the implementation of the business plan. Also, the applicant will have to show that there is inherent opportunities for local recruitment in this business, and the quality of the jobs is just as important as the number of the jobs. Hong Kong these days are not looking for lesser skilled jobs, they're looking for jobs that are tapping into emerging sectors of the economy. Therefore, the idea that you are going to be creating low-level jobs isn't particularly exciting, but if you are creating jobs that can be said to have a future inherent in them, that will work well in relation to how your application is considered. And again, because you have to show prospective benefit, not immediately observable benefit, the idea of future jobs will suffice for the purposes of an approval. So it can be jobs in a plan that will materialise down the road versus jobs that are immediately created, the tension does not have to be fatal for the purposes of getting the visa approved. And of course the Immigration Department will be looking at the kind of resources that you will have available to deploy in the business, and there are typically 4 types of resources that need to be deployed for the purposes of an immigration approval, and it is this element of the approvability test where the rubber hits the road. So these 4 heads of resources are financial resources. The Immigration Department will look very closely to see how the business is going to be funded and where the money is coming from. The Immigration Department will expect to see that you have beneficially owned the financial resources that are going into the business for at least 2 years immediately prior to investing them into the business. The Immigration Department will look to see what kind of commercial resources are at play. That is, who are you doing business with and what support do you have from them. They'll look to see, do you have some sort of prior experience in this particular area? Do you have an exclusive sales agency? Are you bringing some kind of business to Hong Kong that has proven to be successful overseas? Have you signed some kind of contract with a local party that is definitely going to stand you in good stead commercially because of the nature of that arrangement? So any commercial documentation, any commercial arrangements, any commercial agreements that exist, you need to be able to articulate them to the department, and you need to be able to substantiate what you're saying with documentation and support. Additionally, do you have a track record specifically in business generally or in the field that you are going into business in at this particular point in time? So have you done this before? And if not, how does your history advantage you? Because the Immigration Department cannot be asked properly to approve a business that is out of compliance with any particular legal aspects of being able to undertake that business, the Immigration Department will expect to see if there are requisite licenses in place, are there the requisite registrations for business registration purposes, are they all current, is there any security objection. So you need to have your ducks lined up, your T's crossed and your I's dotted when it comes to your paperwork and any particular government licensing that needs to be in place in order to take that business forward. In all the years that we've been undertaking business investment visa work for our clients in Hong Kong, we've seen quite a number of old chestnuts that seem to prevail, that I think are representative of the general tone and tenor of the community in Hong Kong not really understanding how the Immigration Department works when they're considering a business investment application. So some of the old chestnuts that we've seen is, my successful business will be paying tax. Well, this actually doesn't add anything to the whole approvability test of substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong. The idea is that if you are successful, of course you will pay tax, but every other citizen in Hong Kong pays tax as well, so it does not serve to contribute anything for the purposes of the visa consent. The idea that there is a minimum amount of money that needs to be invested is an old chestnut. The funds that are required really need to be sufficient for the purposes of the plan, no more, no less. And as you'll hear when you review the subsequent visa information document, we've done cases in the past where aspects of the approvability test that would call for a financial investment have not been satisfied, but the Immigration Department have granted the approval nonetheless because the rest of the application was sufficiently robust in terms of the limbs of the approvability test being satisfied in other areas, that the minimum amount of money required was not an obstacle to getting the approval. And of course, trying to learn how the Immigration Department are going to look at your visa application in light of what the experience of your friend who had an application approved doesn't actually help you carry forward how your situation is going to be judged. No two visa applications are ever the same, and therefore you can't learn anything from your friend's experience. You've just got to understand what's required generally and then apply it in the context of your circumstances. As mentioned right at the very outset, getting a business investment visa approved is one of the most challenging of activities that you can face in the entire Hong Kong visa process, but there are some ways that you can generally improve your chances. If you are here as a visitor and you're seeking to adjust your status to business investment, then effectively what you need to do is to think big, behave big, take advice in terms of how to best approach your application, and then get a very good sponsor if such is available to you. All of these will send the kind of message to the immigration department that they need to hear, that the whole challenge of substantiality can be addressed in your circumstances. And remember, if you're here as a current visitor, the immigration department arguably will know very little about you. Therefore, you really have the burden of satisfying the immigration department that as a complete stranger to Hong Kong, possibly here for the very first time, certainly never having been here as a resident previously, you will be able to make a substantial contribution to the Hong Kong, notwithstanding the fact that conceptually the odds are stacked against you, because in a sense you've only just arrived off the boat, as it were. However, if you're here as a current employee, you've got a residence visa based on employment, working for a third-party employer, there are ways to improve your chances, in as much as if you wait 3 years after you have first taken up residency, the immigration department will start to look more favourably on your application than if you had just arrived as a visitor. The idea being here is that the risks of you being unsuccessful are slightly less so, given that you do have a track record of having been in Hong Kong and know how Hong Kong works to a certain degree and have the requisite connections and networks in place, that it's possible that your visa situation will turn to the good, because your business stands a better chance of success just because of the fact that you've been here for the 3 years. Think big and behave big. Show the immigration department that you've got big plans. It's all about substantiality, but of course you do need to make sure that anything that you're saying can be supported by facts and also by documentation. Again, my advice would be for you to take advice in effort to improve your chances, because it is a burdensome visa category to address. The approvability criteria are quite nebulous, and what works 1 year might be very different the next year because of the way that the economic situation presently sits. If you are here as a current employee, there is another way to improve your chances, and that is potentially to join in a side business first, which we'll discuss in the next slide. However, whether you're here as a visitor or you're here as a current employee, you have to be aware of the catch-22, and you have to make sure that you get your application in at the soonest possible moment, so that the immigration department are empowered to take a view of what it is that you're up to in Hong Kong. Now, if you are here as a current employee working for a third-party employer, the opportunity to join in a side business is a very real solution for those who are seeking eventually to become a fully fledged business investment visa holder. And the way that joining in a side business works is that because the activity is less than full, by definition it's a side business, the approvability test is far less burdensome. Therefore, the idea of substantial becomes somewhat marginalised in the entire approvability scenario, because it is by definition a small business. The good news is that if you can get the consent to join in a side business first, you're putting the immigration department on notice as to what kind of business you're involved in, and it does then set the stage subsequently for a full business investment visa if you decide that you no longer have the time or the need or require the resources of your current employer to support you whilst you are carrying on your small business on the side. So, as I said, the immigration department are engaged right from the very outset. They can monitor your progress, and that actually bodes quite well for you going forward when you do need to make an application to stay in Hong Kong to do this business full time. It's a very simple immigration consent to secure, and therefore you have the opportunity to use a sole proprietorship, which is an acceptable business vehicle. Typically the Immigration Department, when they're looking at substantiality for the purposes of the test, are not over thrilled with the idea that it's going to be a sole proprietorship which is cheap and easy to set up. They do expect to see some kind of commitment to the business reflected in a sophisticated corporate structure that is best reflected in a limited liability company. However, if you're in a side business, the sole proprietorship will suffice. There's no sponsorship issue because you're still working for your current employer. But there is one condition precedent, and that is your current employer has to agree in writing that they consent to you joining in or taking up this side business whilst they remain your sponsored full-time employer. So if you're not going to join in a side business and you are a current Hong Kong resident with an employment visa sponsored by another firm, there are certain considerations that are in play in your circumstances that need to be addressed. The first is that your existing visa is not transferable to your new business. You must apply to change your visa category to business investment. And until you're at least 3 years resident, the approvability test for a business investment visa is just as onerous for you as it is for a visitor who has in effect just arrived in Hong Kong. Therefore, if you can wait till 3 years, it does help you overall in how the Immigration Department will consider your application. But bear in mind the catch-22 still applies. That is, the whole time that you are working in your business and you have not put the Immigration Department on notice that you're doing that, then you are vulnerable to a prosecution for a breach of your conditions of stay. So get your application at the soonest possible time in order to alleviate those problems. As a business investment visa applicant, you are going to need a sponsor. Why do you need a sponsor? Well, the Immigration Department have deployed a technical mechanism to fund your repatriation if anything goes wrong with your residence in Hong Kong. Well, in terms of who it should be, any bona fide Hong Kong resident will suffice, preferably a permanent Hong Kong identity card holder. But ideally, if you can approach and seek the approval of some business or commerce related party who can show that they are willing to sponsor and support you in your business endeavours, that will help considerably in how the Immigration Department perceive the overall level of support that you've got in Hong Kong at the point of making the application. And so you need to anticipate who that party might be if you have such a candidate available to you, and ensure that they're engaged and on board right from the very outset. So to bring this very brief overview and discussion of the business investment visa to a conclusion, you need to ensure that you make your application once your intention to join the business is crystallised. If not, you will remain vulnerable to a prosecution for breach of your conditions of stay if you've started a business but you don't have any application in the system. The approvability test of substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong is the single most difficult Hong Kong visa challenge. However, if you want to ensure the Immigration Department are considering your circumstances positively, you need to think and act big, knowing of course that you do have to be able to justify the things that you say by supporting evidence and documentation, but the whole concept of substantiality frequently rules out one-man businesses, I'm afraid, although it is not impossible for one-man businesses to be approved under this visa category. It is a very lengthy process. It's going to take you 4 to 6 months for the application procedures to be finalised, and you'll find that they will tax your emotional and time resources. And our strong advice would be to seek professional assistance if it's within your means, because the immigration process here is very challenging and can be helped no end by having professionals guide you through the entire procedure. The next step is for you to review the visa information document. This details each of the essential elements of a successfully argued Hong Kong visa case and contains in context links to all of the resources needed to prepare your application. And these include application templates, the online application forms, screencasts on how to complete the forms, a checklist of all the documents you need to prepare as part of the submission bundle, a crib sheet on how to submit your application, and audio discussions of some of the finer points of official policy and procedure and the specific case examples from the past which will serve to help you by way of illustration. Let's go to the visa information document now.